So I'm pleased to welcome Lindsay Woodside from eCampusOntario. She's going to be giving us kind of a summary presentation, I would say, about activities of eCampusOntario building an ecosystem of recognition.
Great, thanks so much, Don. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lindsay Woodside. I am the Director of Programs and, it's okay, Julie, Programs and Services at eCampusOntario. And I want to start off by acknowledging that I'm so appreciative to have the opportunity to attend this conference and have been delighted and inspired to meet many of you so far, and looking forward to meeting more of you throughout the remainder of the conference. So I want to start off, by mentioning that I'm going to be talking about enabling digital participation and supporting spectrums of recognition. I want to start off by offering a land acknowledgement for the space that eCampusOntario is located on, where we conduct our day-to-day work when we're not working remotely. And so our offices are located in downtown Toronto, Ontario, Canada, within the traditional territories of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Houdinese, and the Wendat peoples. We remain committed to reconciliation with our Indigenous allies, and we are committed to amplifying Indigenous voices, which is a vital component of our journey to reconciliation. And in preparation for today's presentation, where a discussion of recognition, credentialing, validation is so inextricably linked to the notion of access and equity in higher education, I think it's really important that I share with you my personal positionality as an effort to recognize social position and power dynamics. So I would like to acknowledge that I am a white, cisgendered, heterosexual woman living in Toronto, Ontario as a settler on Indigenous land, and that I am able-bodied. So who I am shapes my perspective and lens in these conversations. I want to acknowledge that at the outset. So the agenda for this afternoon is fourfold. I'm going to start by discussing who we are and what we do in terms of increasing digital participation in the Ontario postsecondary sector. From there, I'll move into unpacking some of the Government of Ontario's priorities as they relate to digital transformation. Next, I will discuss how eCampusOntario is driving digital transformation by discussing two open education initiatives that we convene for the sector, and I'll discuss the associated spectrums of recognition that are attached to those. And then, time permitting, I'd really appreciate the opportunity for us to engage in a short futures discussion around how we might shape policy and practice in models of recognition. Oh, there we go. Okay, so eCampusOntario, who are we? So we are a Canadian non-for-profit, government-funded consortium that represents all of the 53 publicly assisted institutions in the province of Ontario. So 24 colleges, 25 universities, and 4 Indigenous institutes make up the bulk of our membership. And Alyssa and I, my colleague who's joining me today from Ontario, although we have many years of collective experience working inside the walls of the institution, at eCampusOntario, we work alongside our institutions, and we support our institutions by assisting them in testing and developing online tools to enable the use of educational technologies and digital transformation. I'd like to frame our discussion today in the words of our CEO, Robert Luke. And he talks a lot about this, especially recently, that the model of post-secondary education has been disrupted. And so education has now become digital first. And we have an opportunity, as he says, to make an intentional shift into the futures of education. The shift is a call to intentionally designing learning futures in order to empower us to make choices that support diverse learners, whoever they are, hybrid modes of learning, however they want to learn, and their relationship to online learning. All of which requires concerted efforts at coordination as an ecosystem. In order to mobilize the higher ed sector to increase and support digital participation, we are providing the appropriate inputs to achieve this between education and employment. And so they include supporting Ontario's learners, so prioritizing the workforce of the future. It's also our mandate to enable member institutions to embrace digital transformation. So ensuring our member institutions have the correct supports that they need in a timely manner so that they can use them effectively on the ground. And finally, connecting our campuses to employers for collaborative innovation. So here we're charged with creating stronger and resilient partnerships and engagements and economic opportunities for our institutions to connect with employers across key sectors. So helping to make those private-public partnerships the obvious win-win choice. So I've mentioned now that eCampus Ontario plays a critical role in championing and advancing digital participation in the post-secondary education sector. We're helping to grow the economy by connecting our higher ed institutions and learners to the future of learning and the future of work. And to do this, we provide the Ontario sector with open education platforms, programs, services that are responsive to shifts and opportunities in the educational and employment landscape, ensuring that all learners, from newcomers, recent grads, and those returning to education for reskilling and upskilling, get the credentials they need for the jobs that they want. So while the role of these open and flexible systems of learning is to support learners to realize their career goals, our institutions, while they remain committed to this end, they also remain in healthy debate and conversation around what flexible recognition as the output of learning ought to look like. And so how we, as an organization, continue to support them and digital participation in education whilst advocating for spectrums of recognition in all its forms will be vitally important to our institution's growth needs and learners' multi-access journeys, because the pathways to get people into programs and into jobs are in fact closer than they appear. We believe in education that is flexible and inclusive. So an ecosystem that provides flexible, inclusive, and accessible, transformative education, regardless of their location or situation, should also ensure that the recognition for skills acquisition remains just as flexible and inclusive. And as we heard from Nate yesterday at the beginning of the day, he stated that our institutions have a responsibility to shape our recognition system. So supporting Ontario's priorities, obviously, is the Government of Ontario that I've mentioned now several times, and they support eCampus Ontario and the sector through a variety of initiatives, but these are the two that I want to point out that are open education policy initiatives and directives. So the first is the virtual learning strategy. The Government of Ontario made a historic investment at the end of 2020 and has made a significant one since that time. Over $70 million of funds have been directed directly into the post-secondary system to create high-quality online learning assets that are open in nature. So at a minimum, all of these assets needed to be licensed with an Ontario Commons license, so the sector themselves could share the resources, and creators could apply a more liberal license. 75% of the creators that took advantage of these funds applied a Creative Commons license. And so these assets are continually being added to our open library. We have the largest open education library in Canada, and we've seen at least 350 new assets, new OER, labs, simulations, courses, micro-credentials, being added to the open library for the sector to take advantage of. And again, this was a direct result of government priority in funding high-quality online education. And the second is our micro-credential strategy. So our government holds the position that as Ontario continues to focus on rebuilding and growing the economy, Businesses and employers need skilled workers who can hit the ground running, and workers need the appropriate skills and training to land in-demand jobs. So the government has been integral in supporting the development of micro-credentials in the province of Ontario, and we've been working to develop and I'll speak about this in a little bit, but working to develop a large number of open resources to support our sector to actually build out these micro-credentials. So what do they look like? How do you go about determining if, the ins and outs or the ingredients, key-level ingredients that need to go into building one, etc. So this is where spectrums of recognition that recognize varied skills and knowledge achievement come into play. They are vital to expanding learning opportunities for any stage in the learning journey. Our organization also supports and advances the participation in the digital learning ecosystem through the delivery of core programming and services which are openly licensed and that support digital transformation. So here's an example of a number of those, and again, you can link to these in the appendices section of the presentation, which is on the portal. So these open platforms, programs, and services leverage public investment and public infrastructure to support high-quality online learning, citizen engagement, educator upskilling, newcomer integration, and learner career fulfillment for social and economic productivity. Our sector's active participation in these efforts in the short term has helped Ontario's COVID-19 recovery efforts. But in order to ensure the economic and social benefits continue, we need to prioritize rapid preparation of the labor force where gaps exist to ensure that we restart the economy. So to this end, we at eCampusOntario advocate that the education curricula that is delivered by our institutions is open, flexible, accessible, stackable, fungible, transferable, transcriptable, and we talk the talk. We support spectrums of recognition in our own platforms and programs and services, namely in micro-credentials and through the Ontario Extend program, which Alyssa, if you caught her session earlier today, we support spectrums of recognition through that program as well, which I'll mention here momentarily. To help model this idea of unlocking traditional credentialing practices. So in essence, if we can do it, so if we can adopt spectrums of recognition to support the educators, why can't the institutions do the same on the ground to support the learners? So I'll talk about these two initiatives, 5 minutes, okay. Talk about these two initiatives here quickly in terms of how we, again, support the sector through spectrums of recognition. So micro-credentials, we've been a leader in this space since 2017. It's been, as I mentioned before, a government priority, and we have developed a number of open education resources to support the development of micro-credentials across the sector. We've also spun up a portal, and so we have over 1,600 courses that are currently listed on that portal. Students can go through there, filter them, mine them, learn about the opportunities, and they can enroll in the micro-credential. It's still early days on data collection. We don't actually know if students are getting into the jobs that they desire. It's too early at this point, and it's a slow feedback cycle. Our hope is that they eventually will, and we'll have data analytics in place and data collection methods to ensure that we are tracking that. Our institutions still have a lot of work to do, if they choose, in order to nest the micro-credentials into traditional degrees and diplomas more intentionally and deliberately, recognize them as stackable entities and credentials on their own as a new way of doing education. So maybe one day, ideally getting to a time when a provincial network exists that recognizes micro-credentials as integrated, not as an add-on, but as integrated to traditional degrees and diplomas, if a learner were to pick them up from different institutions, for instance. We have a community of practice that has come out of this work in micro-credentials as well. I think it's about 200 people and growing, and they are continually unpacking some of these challenges that we're facing to collaboratively get to a point where micro-credentials are more integrated into academic credentialing. The second program that I just want to talk about that we again provide for our sector, where we endorse a spectrum of recognition, is Ontario Extend. So my colleague Alyssa talked about this program this morning. This is a micro-credentialed professional learning program that's designed to build up digital literacy and fluency skills in educators. So we've had over 1,200 participants in this program. We've issued over 600 plus, 900 plus badges, and 80 micro-credentials. This is the visual language of the program. It's a 35-hour program. Again, it's Creative Commons licensed. And educators, librarians, teaching assistants, all participate in this program if they choose. It's, again, 35 hours. They receive digital badges that you can see here, flanking. There's 6 of them, digital badges upon the completion of each module. And then if they successfully complete all of those, they're awarded that micro-credential there in the middle to signify completion. We use the CanCred badging system to award these badges. The CanCred CanCred, let me get this straight, Dawn, because you're gonna. So the open badges are issued through the CanCred factory, and then they're translated over to the passport, you can see here on the right. And from there, Alyssa mentioned this morning, you can share out to your LinkedIn profiles. So you can see here, this is a perfect example of us using spectrums of open recognition to train up and shore up the skills of frontline educators in our institutions. And we've been very successful at it as well. Lastly, I just want to touch on the potential of unbundled learning options. So amongst this open system of practices, pedagogies, and communities that uphold our platforms, programs, and services, the virtual learning landscape calls for open collaboration as well as intentional initiatives across and within institutions to support unbundled learning pathways and flexible spectrums of recognition technologies. And so, personalized learning, when we think about the potential of unbundled learning, considers reskilling, upskilling, re-entry to the workforce, learners without existing post-secondary education, newcomer integration. We consider work readiness, life and career growth. We also consider the challenges in this space as well around, we've talked already about this in the previous sessions, definitions, the format, supplements, replacements, stackability. But there's also a lot of emerging opportunities as well in the way of micromasters, nano degrees, MOOCs, stackability. I really appreciated Nan's session earlier today about incremental credentialing. I thought that was really, really interesting to think about it that way as well. And I think am I out of time? Okay, so just something for you to think about maybe on the break or at the dinner tonight, but these are the things that we are facing, the questions, the challenges, the themes of our communities of practice at eCampus Ontario in terms of creating the space and the buy-in to encourage our institutions to continue the evolving conversations around spectrums of recognition. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Lindsay.